The golden sun was rising over the city of Salmir. Its light touched the walls of the tall castle where Princess Althea stood by her balcony. The wind played with her long hair and carried the sound of trumpets calling from the courtyard below. It was the day of the great tournament. The day when warriors from every kingdom would show their strength and courage before the royal family. Althea's heart beat with both hope and worry. The tournament was not only a game, it was also the beginning of peace talks among the divided lands of humans. For many years, the kingdoms had fought wars that left families broken and towns in ashes. This event could finally bring them together again. Down in the courtyard, hundreds of people gathered to watch. Flags waved in bright colors, and the sound of drums echoed through the air. Children climbed on their parents' shoulders to see better, and traders called out their goods, selling bread, fruit, and sweet drinks. Among the crowd stood a young man named Eli Turner. He wore plain armor that showed signs of long use. The edges of his breastplate were bent, and the leather straps of his gloves were uneven from hard work. He was the youngest warrior in the tournament, only 19, and the son of a blacksmith from a small village at the edge of Somer's borders. Eli had come not to seek fame or riches, but to prove that courage and honor did not belong only to the powerful. He had trained for months, rising before dawn to practice with his sword while the fields were still covered in mist. His father had warned him that standing among nobles would bring only trouble, but his mother had smiled softly and said that courage often wore humble boots. As the trumpet sounded again, Eli looked around at the other warriors. They were taller, stronger, and carried weapons engraved with marks of noble houses. Their armor shone in the sunlight. Some noticed him and laughed quietly to each other. One of them, a broad man with a scar across his cheek, spoke with mock kindness. "Careful, boy," he said. "The princess is looking for champions, not errand boys." Eli said nothing. He simply tightened his gloves and looked toward the grandstand where Princess Althea would soon appear. When the royal family entered the arena, the crowd grew silent. The princess walked beside her father, King Aldrich, her white gown shimmering like a morning cloud. She was known across the lands as wise and kind, but also strong-willed, refusing to marry anyone chosen by politics. Today she would not only watch the warriors, but also choose one to serve as her champion, a sign of unity for the realm. Eli watched her carefully, standing at the edge of the line. For a moment, their eyes met, quickly looked away, not knowing if she had truly seen him or just looked in his direction. Yet the warmth of that moment stayed with him like a spark in his chest. The contests began soon after. The arena roared with cheers as the first warriors clashed. Spears flew, swords met, and shields cracked. Dust rose beneath their feet. Eli waited for his turn, feeling the heavy beat of his heart. When his name was called, he stepped forward, lifting his sword in respect to the judges and the royal stand. His opponent was a knight twice his age and size. The crowd laughed quietly, expecting the fight to be short. But from the first strike, Eli fought with surprising speed. He moved lightly, dodging heavy blows, his training shining through every motion. As sweat poured down his face, he remembered his father's words. A steady hand beats a strong arm. After several tense minutes, a single clever move sent his opponent's sword spinning into the dirt. The crowd gasped, and before anyone could speak, Eli's blade stopped just short of the man's shoulder. Clear victory. For a moment there was silence, then cheers erupted. The young blacksmith's son had defeated a seasoned knight. Eli lowered his weapon and stepped back, catching his breath. His arms shook with exhaustion, but his eyes glowed with quiet pride. Up above, Princess Althea watched with great interest. She leaned forward, studying the young warrior. Something about his calmness after victory caught her attention. When the next rounds began, she continued to watch him, noting how he treated each rival with respect and never boasted of his triumphs. By the time the sun began to sink, Eli had won every match set before him. The crowd now shouted his name. Althea's lips curved into a thoughtful smile. She whispered to her attendant that sometimes fate hides greatness where no one expects it. As the final drum beat sounded, Eli stood in the center of the arena, dust and sweat clinging to him. He looked toward the royal box, waiting for the princess to declare the champion. The air was still and bright. Then he saw her rise from her seat, her eyes fixed on him with a strange, calm fire. She raised her hand as if to command the world to listen. Far below, Eli's heart felt as if time had stopped. Everyone watched: warriors, nobles, children, and peasants. What would she say next? Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Though the day was ending, the story of their fate was only beginning. The crowd waited in deep silence. The light from the setting sun covered the arena in shades of gold and red. Princess Althea stood tall beside her father. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were steady. She looked down at the young man who had surprised everyone with his bravery. Then, in a voice clear and strong, she said the words that would soon be whispered across every street and village in Solmir. "This one," she said while pointing at him, "the youngest warrior, he will be mine." The words hung in the air like thunder. For a moment no one moved. The people did not even breathe. And then the entire courtyard erupted into shocked whispers. Some laughed in disbelief, some gasped in wonder. Even the king stood frozen, unsure if he had heard his daughter correctly. Eli Turner stood in the center of the arena, his sword still in his hand. His heart raced, and his face turned pale. He had no idea what she meant by those words. Did she wish to honor him? Did she choose him as her guard? Or had he somehow offended her? The cheers that had filled the place a moment ago now turned to confused murmurs. A nobleman in a silver cloak stepped forward and bowed to the king. "Your Majesty," he said carefully. Surely her choice was made in excitement. The princess must have meant only to praise his courage. But Althea stepped down from the royal stand before her father could speak. The crowd parted as she walked through them. Her gown brushed the dusty ground and her guards followed at a distance. When she reached Eli, she stopped in front of him. Her blue eyes met his brown ones. She looked calm, even as his hands shook slightly at his sides. "What is your name?" she asked. "Eli Turner, Your Highness," he said, bowing awkwardly. She smiled. "Eli Turner," she repeated gently. "I declare before my father and before this kingdom that you are my chosen champion." Gasps and shouts rose from the nobles in the stands. Never had a princess chosen a champion without approval from the council, and never, in the long history of Solmir, had a royal chosen a common-born soldier. The king rose from his seat and spoke in a low but heavy voice. "Althea," he said, "do you understand what this means?" She looked up at him and nodded. "Yes, father, I have made my choice. There will be no peace among our divided lands if we keep serving only the same proud houses. We must trust those who fight not for gold or crown, but for honor." The king looked at her for a long moment, and then at Eli. His face softened with both pride and worry. "Then so it shall be," he said at last. The crowd broke into noise again, half cheering, half protesting. Some of the older nobles turned away in anger, whispering that this act would break the alliance between houses. Others clapped their hands, moved by the princess's courage. That night, when the arena emptied and lamps glowed along the castle walls, Eli was brought to a chamber near the royal court. The tall doors opened, and he was told to wait until the princess arrived. He had never been inside such a grand place before. The walls were painted with scenes of old battles, and silver light spilled in through high windows. He stood still, unsure if he should sit or kneel. After a few minutes, the door opened again, and Althea entered without her guards. She looked tired, but calm. "You are wondering why I did this," she said while walking closer. Eli swallowed and nodded. "Yes, my princess. I am honored, but I am also confused. I am only a blacksmith's son. Why choose me when you have hundreds of knights stronger and wiser than I?" She looked at him with warmth in her eyes. "Because you fight for something the others have forgotten. You fought for the sake of courage, not pride. You showed mercy when you could have sought glory. I need a warrior who fights with both strength and heart. The future of Solmir will not depend on proud names, but on pure hearts." Eli looked down, unable to find the right words. At last he said softly, "Then I will serve you with all that I am, princess. I will guard your name and your kingdom until my last breath." Althea smiled. "Good," she said, "because what awaits us will test every promise we make." Outside the tall windows, a storm gathered over the city. The flags atop the towers whipped in the wind. Far beyond the lights of the castle, in the hills and valleys, others were already planning to break the fragile peace born that day. The princess's choice had touched hearts, but it had also awakened old hatreds. Eli did not know it then, but his life had changed forever. From that moment on, he would no longer be just the blacksmith's son from a quiet village. He had stepped into a world of secrets, power, and rising danger. And beside him, Princess Althea had tied her fate to his, not as ruler and servant, but as two souls standing together against the coming storm. In the silence of that first night, he looked out the window at the restless sky. The city slept below, peaceful for now. But in his heart, he felt the ground of destiny shifting beneath his feet. The story that had begun with a royal decree was only just beginning to unfold. The days after the tournament were restless inside the castle of Salmir. The story of the princess and the young warrior spread quickly across the lands. In every village and market, people talked about it. Some called it a miracle, others said it was madness. In the great halls of nobles, whispers grew louder. Many proud families felt insulted that the princess had chosen a common boy to stand beside her. They hid their anger behind smiles, but in secret meetings, plans began to form. Eli Turner tried to ignore the growing tension. He had been given a small room in the soldiers' wing of the castle, not far from the royal quarters. Every morning he trained with the guards and the knights, practicing until his arms ached and his armor felt like stone on his shoulders. Some soldiers respected him, others mocked him quietly, yet he never answered them back. He remembered what his father had told him long ago, that steady courage was stronger than loud words. Princess Althea spent most of her time with her council, preparing for the unity talks among the human kingdoms. She met with leaders from distant lands, who came bringing gifts and fine words, but hid pride behind their polite smiles. Every night when the meetings were over, she would walk through the quiet gardens of the castle. Sometimes Eli saw her there, walking among the flowers under the soft light of the moon. One night she noticed him standing guard by the gate and called him over. "Eli," she said softly, "you look troubled? Has something happened?" He shook his head. "Oh, my princess. I am only trying to stay worthy of the place you gave me." She smiled gently. "You do not need to prove yourself to me. You already have. But trust me, others inside these walls will not see what I see. You must stay watchful." Eli bowed his head. "I will, princess." The next morning, strange rumors began to circle. A nobleman who had been close to the princess's father was seen whispering with foreign advisors. Papers were found burned in the royal stables. Late at night, Eli overheard two guards talking about secret messages being carried beyond the city gates. Something dark was moving inside the kingdom. That evening, Eli went to see the commander of the guard, hoping to report what he had heard. But as he entered the hall, he saw the commander speaking quietly with the same nobleman suspected of treachery. They stopped talking and looked at him with cold eyes. Eli nodded politely, then hurried away, his heart pounding. He knew he could not trust everyone in the castle. Later that night, he went to the princess's chambers. The guards at her door hesitated but let him in when she called for him. "There is something you must know," he said quietly. "Someone here is plotting against the crown. I do not have proof yet, but I can feel danger growing." Althea walked to the window and looked out over the dark courtyard. Torches burned below like small stars. "I believe you," she said. "The council has become divided. Many think peace is weakness. They want to rule through fear again. What will you do?" Eli asked. She turned to him with steady eyes. "I will do what a ruler must do. But I cannot fight this battle alone." For a moment, neither spoke. Then she reached for the silver ring she wore on her finger. "Take this," she said. "Show it only if you are in danger or need my word to protect you." Eli hesitated to accept such a gift, but she placed it in his palm and closed his hand around it. "You are not just my champion now, Eli," she said. "You are my shield." That night, sleep would not come to him. He kept hearing the echo of her voice, and the weight of her trust pressed heavy on his heart. He thought of his village, of his mother and father, and how far he had come from the quiet life he once knew. Now, he stood inside walls filled with power and lies, and 2 days later, the first attempt to harm the princess came. During the feast held to welcome an important lord, one of the servants carrying the wine stumbled and dropped the jug. The liquid spilled across the floor, and a strange smell filled the air. Eli, who stood behind the princess's chair, noticed it first. He shouted for the guards to stop the servant just as the man bolted toward the door. The hall broke into confusion. The guards caught the man, and under questioning he confessed he had been paid to poison the princess's cup. The king was furious. The nobles were silent, their faces pale. Althea turned to Eli. "You saved my life," she said simply. "Only did my duty," he answered. That night, the castle stayed awake. Watchmen stood at every hall, and riders were sent to the borders. The peace that had seemed possible now hung by a thread. Althea and Eli met secretly in her study to plan what to do next. "We are surrounded by enemies, and some are closer than we think," she said. Eli looked at her with calm determination. "Then we will face them together," he said. The princess nodded. "Together, yes, no matter what comes." Outside, thunder rolled across the distant hills as the storm grew nearer. Inside the stone walls of Solmir, two hearts had already chosen their side. The morning after the failed poisoning, Solmir Castle felt heavy with fear. The servants whispered in corners, and the guards checked every shadow twice. The king ordered the gates locked, and the city watched day and night. Still, danger hid behind smiles and polite words. Princess Althea stayed calm, moving through the halls with quiet strength, while Eli Turner never left her side. He followed her from council meetings to the training yard, always alert, always watching. Days turned into weeks, and unrest began to spread beyond the castle walls. Rumors of rebellion traveled through the villages. Some said a group of lords had joined together, angry that the princess had chosen Eli as her champion. Others claimed they were planning to take the throne for themselves. The princess received countless letters filled with threats and warnings. She burned them all. Her face remained calm, but Eli could see the worry growing behind her steady eyes. One evening, as the red sun sank and the sky darkened, Althea gathered her closest advisors for a secret meeting. Only Eli, the king's old counselor Henry, and a few loyal knights were there. Candles flickered, lighting the map spread across the long table. "The western provinces have turned against us," Henry said. "They claim you have forgotten tradition and insulted the noble houses. They seek any excuse for power," Althea replied. "If I had chosen one of their sons as champion, they would still be restless. They do not fear me. They fear change." Eli stood near the doorway, silent, listening. He had never seen such tension. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. At last, Henry looked at the princess. "If they attack, they will come with great force. We must prepare the army." She nodded slowly. "We will not start a war, but we will be ready if war seeks us." After the meeting ended, Eli followed her through the empty corridor. "Princess," he said, "let me go to the western provinces. I can travel quietly and find out what they plan." She stopped walking and looked at him. "It is too dangerous. They would know who you are." "I will go as a traveler," Eli said. "No armor, no flag. Let me do this for you." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she reached out and touched his shoulder. "Be careful, Eli. Trust no one." That night, disguised in plain clothes, Eli left the castle under the cover of darkness. The road to the west was long and silent. He passed farms where lights still burned late and villages where old men gathered to tell stories of younger days. Everywhere he went, he heard talk of change, of lords and soldiers raising banners against the crown. After 3 days of travel, he reached the city of Thornevale, the largest stronghold in the western lands. The streets were crowded, but the mood was tense. Banners of gold and crimson hung from towers, symbols of the noble families that had once served the throne. Now those same banners stood against it. Eli watched and listened. He saw wagons carrying weapons, soldiers drilling in the courtyards, and merchants whispering to each other that war was coming. Late one night, while staying in a small inn by the river, Eli overheard 2 captains talking. They spoke of marching on Solmir Castle within a month and taking the princess hostage. One of them even laughed and said she had brought this on herself by letting a common man stand beside her. Eli's hands clenched, but he stayed quiet. The moment they left, he slipped out the back door and rode through the night. Every mile felt longer than the last. Rain began to fall, soaking him to the bone, but he did not stop. He had to warn her. When he finally reached the castle after 2 days, he could barely stand. The guards rushed to open the gates, and the princess came to him as soon as she heard he had returned. Eli, she said, seeing the mud and exhaustion on his face. What happened? They're coming, he said breathlessly. An army gathers in the west. They plan to seize Solmir and force you to surrender. The princess grew pale but stood tall. Then we have no time to waste. Within hours, the castle prepared for battle. Messengers rode to loyal provinces calling for help. Blacksmiths worked through the night, shaping armor and sharpening swords. Eli, though weak from the journey, joined the soldiers again, training them and giving orders. The king watched his daughter move among her people, calming fears and giving hope. She is strong, the old man said quietly to Henry, but this war will test her more than anything before. 3 days later, the enemy banners appeared on the horizon. The sound of marching feet reached the city before dawn. From the castle towers, Eli and Althea watched as fires glowed like tiny stars across the plains. This is it, Althea said softly. The moment our choice must stand. Eli looked at her with calm resolve. Then we will make them remember what we stand for. When the first horns of battle sounded, Solmir answered with its own. Arrows flew, drums thundered, and the air filled with the clash of steel. Through the chaos, Eli led the defense, his voice steady, his sword bright. Althea stayed on the walls, organizing the lines, refusing to hide while her people fought. The battle rose and roared through day and night, and though the enemy was many, Solmir's warriors held strong. When dawn finally came, smoke covered the hills, but the castle still stood. Eli found the princess near the courtyard, her gown torn, but her eyes shining. You fought like one born to it, he said. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. And you fought like the hope of our people, she answered softly. The war was not yet over, but in that brief sunrise, they both knew one thing had been proven true. Courage and unity were stronger than pride. Smoke drifted above the ruined fields at the edge of Solmir. The sun rose red behind the clouds, turning the air thick and strange. The battle had ended, but the cost was written across every wall and stone. Many homes had burned. Many brave soldiers had fallen. Yet the city still stood. Princess Althea walked through the courtyard, her armor scratched and her hands wrapped in cloth. People bowed as she passed, some weeping with relief. The sound of hammers and saws echoed as villagers began rebuilding. Eli Turner walked beside her, limping slightly. His arm was bound from the wound he had taken while defending the main gate. The healers had told him to rest, but he refused to stay still when there was work to be done. The princess glanced at him with quiet worry. You should be in bed, she said softly. Eli shook his head. I cannot lie down while others rebuild what I swore to protect. She smiled faintly. You never listen, do you? Only when I must, he said. And they both laughed quietly, the sound light in the heavy morning air. The king was weak from the long nights of worry, and the council had begun to look to Althea for every decision. She took command with calm strength, sending riders across the lands with messages of peace and thanks. Some of the noble houses that had risen against her surrendered, asking mercy. Others vanished into exile. There was still danger, but for the first time, hope felt real. One afternoon, as the castle bells rang to announce victory, the people gathered in the square. The princess stepped onto the balcony to speak. Eli stood behind her, silent and proud, dressed in the simple armor that had become his mark. The crowd fell silent when she raised her hand. My people, she said in a clear voice, this city was tested by fear and fire, but today it stands stronger than before. We did not win because of crowns or titles. We won because of courage, unity, and faith in one another. We will not return to the old ways of pride and division. We will build a kingdom where every man and woman has worth, whether born in a palace or a humble home. The crowd erupted with cheers, their voices rising like a wave. The name Althea echoed from the rooftops. When she turned to Eli afterward, her eyes held tears she did not try to hide. They believe in you, Eli said quietly. They believe in us, she replied, and they must. Because the hardest battles are not always fought with swords. That evening, the castle held a feast to honor those who had fallen and those who had fought. Music filled the great hall, though sadness still lingered in many hearts. The walls were lined with banners and candles burned in memory of the dead. Eli sat at the princess's side, uneasy in the fine clothes the servants had forced him to wear. Every few minutes, someone came to thank him. The children brought him flowers, It felt strange to him, yet he was grateful. Later, when most of the guests had gone and the hall had grown quiet, Althea and Eli walked out into the garden. The moon reflected on the fountains, and the scent of roses filled the air. For a long time they said nothing. The war was behind them, but uncertainty still lay ahead. Finally, Althea spoke. "When I first saw you in the tournament, I did not know why I chose you. My heart simply decided before my mind could speak. Now I know. The kingdom needed someone who reminded it of what is real." Eli looked down at the stones beneath his boots. "I am no hero, Princess. I only stood beside you because I believed in what you fought for." She nodded slowly. "That is why you became one." A quiet breeze moved between them. Around them, the city glowed faintly in the distance, alive and strong again. For the first time in many years, the people of Salmir slept without fear. In the following weeks, peace began to spread. Roads once broken by war filled again with merchants, children, and travelers. The fields turned green. The bells of the city rang not for alarm, but for life. The princess opened schools and shelters, urging the people to learn and rebuild together. Eli spent his days helping the guards, and sometimes training the young ones who dreamed of being knights one day. But no matter how busy they were, each evening they would walk through the castle gardens. As they had that first night after the war, they spoke not as ruler and soldier, but as two people bound by trust, respect, and the lessons of all they had seen. Years passed. The songs of Salmir no longer spoke of war, but of peace and the strange destiny that began when a princess pointed at the youngest warrior and declared he would be hers. Some called it legend, others a love story, but for those who had lived it, it was something deeper, a tale of courage that changed the way humans saw one another. When travelers came to the city many years later, they would see the tall statues in the square, side by side. One of Princess Althea, her hand lifted high in promise, and one of Eli Turner, the humble blacksmith's son, who became the heart of a kingdom. It was said that on warm nights, when the wind passed through the square, you could almost hear their voices, soft and sure, reminding the people that strength and honor belong to all, and that the truest victory is the one shared by every human heart.